Emma stood there, unsure of what to do or say. She had always been the quiet one, the one who tried to avoid conflict. But this was different. This wasn't just a sibling spat. She could feel the distance between herself and Lily widening with every passing day, and it was starting to hurt in ways she didn't know how to express. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the letter on the table. It was the same letter that Emma had received a few weeks earlier, but had kept hidden, unsure of how to bring it up. It was from her biological mother, someone Emma hadn't heard from in years. As Sarah opened the letter, her heart skipped a beat. The contents were not what she expected at all. The letter didn't just talk about Emma's early childhood or the circumstances of her adoption. It mentioned something that made Sarah's blood run cold. There were accusations, rumors, and names that Sarah hadn't heard in years. This was more than just a family drama, it was a piece of the town's dark past, a past that was far more complicated than they had ever imagined. The letter hinted at secrets tied to Emma's biological family, secrets that no one in their small town knew about. Emma wasn't just an adopted child, she was the daughter of a woman involved in a scandal that rocked the community years ago. Emma's adoption had been arranged quickly, almost hastily, by Sarah and Mark, who had never truly known the extent of the circumstances surrounding her biological mother. It was always presented as a simple story: Emma was just another child in need of a loving home. But now, Sarah understood that there was more to it, and Lily's resentment wasn't just about being an older sister. There was something bigger at play here, something that neither she nor Mark had considered. The weight of the moment settled over Sarah as she held the letter in her hands. She had been so focused on keeping their family together, on providing Emma with the love and stability she needed, that she hadn't asked enough questions. Had she been too quick to embrace Emma without knowing the full story? And now Lily, her own flesh and blood, was rejecting Emma in the most painful way possible. Sarah felt the burden of guilt pressing down on her. How could she fix this? Was it too late? Meanwhile, Emma, standing in the doorway, was staring at her parents, silently pleading for answers she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and heavy. There was a distance between everyone, an invisible wall that couldn't be ignored. Emma wanted to ask if Lily really meant what she had said, if Lily truly wanted her to leave. But she couldn't bring herself to speak. The rejection was too much, too sudden. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but the only thing she could hear in her head was Lily's voice, filled with venom, telling her to go away. In that moment, Sarah knew that their family was facing a crossroads. Everything had been turned upside down. What started as a simple act of kindness, adopting a child in need, had become tangled in a web of secrets, lies, and pain that no one had expected. What had once seemed like a story of hope and second chances was now a bitter reminder of how complicated life could be. And as Sarah looked at Emma's face, she wondered if they would ever be able to heal from the wounds that had due. The next few days in the house felt like a storm had passed through, leaving destruction in its wake. The air was thick with unspoken words, tension hanging heavily in every room. Lily refused to speak to Emma, barely acknowledging her presence at the dinner table. She sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the food in front of her, only occasionally glancing up with disdain when Emma nervously tried to make conversation. The silence between them grew, more suffocating with each passing hour. Mark and Sarah tried to act as though everything was normal, but the cracks in their family's foundation were too wide to ignore. Emma, usually the one who kept to herself, found herself retreating further and further into her own thoughts. She was beginning to doubt everything she had once believed. Her adoption had always been a dream to her, a new life, a fresh start with a family who cared about her. But now, in the face of Lily's rejection, Emma began to question whether she truly belonged. She had always been different, she knew that. She was quiet, reserved, and sometimes, it seemed like she could never get it right in Lily's eyes. But this was something she hadn't seen coming. She had no idea what had changed in Lily's heart, or if it was even something she could ever fix. The tension at home wasn't the only thing weighing on Emma. Sarah and Mark, both exhausted and heartbroken, began to argue more frequently. Mark was frustrated with Sarah's constant attempts to mediate between the girls, while Sarah, in turn, was angry at Mark for brushing off Lily's feelings. Their once solid partnership was starting to fray at the edges, and it was clear that neither of them knew how to handle the growing rift between their daughters. One evening, as Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, reading through the letter from Emma's biological mother again, something strange caught her attention. She had read it multiple times in the past few days, but this time, one sentence stood out. It was a simple line about Emma's biological mother having been involved in a scandal, something Sarah had assumed was a mistake or an exaggeration. But now, with Lily's words echoing in her mind, the weight of the truth started to sink in. Emma's adoption hadn't been as straightforward as they had believed. There had been secrets, ones that Sarah and Mark had chosen not to dig into too deeply when they first agreed to adopt Emma. They had always focused on what was best for her, but now, the idea that Emma's past was tied to something bigger, something dark, was beginning to disturb Sarah more than she had realized. The following day, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed to find out the full story. There was no more room for assumptions or half-truths. If Emma's past had truly been so connected to the town's history, if there was a scandal surrounding her biological family, then Sarah had to understand it all. The first step was to visit the local archives, something she had never considered doing before. As Sarah walked into the dimly lit building, she could feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on her, as if the walls themselves held secrets long buried. After hours of searching through dusty files and old newspaper clippings, Sarah found what she was looking for. There it was, in black and white, a story that had made headlines years ago, a story that had been all but forgotten. Emma's biological mother had been involved in a major scandal that involved corruption at the highest levels of the town's government. She had been an outspoken activist, someone who had tried to expose deep-seated corruption that had been festering for years. But instead of being praised for her courage, she had been silenced, branded as a criminal, and her family was torn apart. Emma's biological mother had disappeared shortly after, and Emma, as a young child, had been placed into foster care. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she read the details. It was worse than she had imagined. The community had never known the full extent of the story, only bits and pieces had been leaked. But now, with the truth staring her in the face, Sarah realized that Emma's adoption had been anything but ordinary. She wasn't just a child in need of a home, she was a child born into a family that had been vilified and cast aside by the town, a family whose name had become synonymous with scandal. And yet, all these years, Sarah and Mark had raised Emma without knowing the full truth. The realization hit Sarah hard. She had never fully understood the weight of Emma's past, or the weight it would carry on their family. As Sarah processed the information, she felt a pang of guilt and anger. How had they all missed this? How had they failed to see the signs? The adoption had been rushed, and while they had always believed they were doing the right thing, they hadn't done enough to prepare Emma, or themselves, for what she had come from. The past they had tried to leave behind had been following them all along, and now, with Lily's rejection of Emma, everything was coming to a head. Back at home, the atmosphere grew more tense. Lily had retreated into her room after another argument with Emma. She couldn't understand why Emma, despite being quiet and often distant, seemed to have a constant air of calm around her. It was as though Emma didn't care that Lily wanted her gone. It made Lily feel even more alone, more alienated, and it only fueled her resentment. She didn't know how to deal with these feelings of jealousy and anger. She didn't know how to make it stop. But what she didn't realize was that her feelings were rooted in something much deeper than she could comprehend. The secrets of Emma's past were slowly starting to unravel, and Lily was about to be faced with a truth that would shake her world to its core. One evening, as Lily sat in her room, scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon a local news story from years ago. The headline caught her eye: "Whistleblower family torn apart in scandal." Curiosity piqued, Lily clicked the link. She didn't expect to find anything that would make her feel differently about Emma. But as she read, she found herself frozen. The article described the story of a family that had been destroyed by a corrupt government system, a family that had fought for justice, and failed. The names were unfamiliar, but as she read on, a wave of recognition washed over her. One of the names mentioned was Emma's biological mother. Lily's heart began to race. She felt a lump form in her throat. She had no idea that Emma's past was tied to something so dark, so complicated. She had never asked the right questions. She had never bothered to look deeper. And now, she felt like the walls around her were closing in. The girl she had rejected, the girl she had pushed away, was she really so different from Lily after all? Was she just another victim of a system that had failed them both? The more Lily thought about it, the more she realized that her own resentment was misplaced. She had been blaming Emma for something that wasn't her fault. In fact, it wasn't anyone's fault. The weight of their family's secrets was bigger than either of them had realized. And now, Lily had a decision to make, one that would change everything. The days that followed were a blur for Lily. She could hardly focus on anything. At school, her thoughts were consumed by Emma's past. The truth of her biological mother's scandal and the depth of the family's history weighed heavily on her shoulders, like a constant reminder of everything she had been blind to. Lily felt a strange mixture of guilt, shame, and confusion. The news about Emma's family was nothing like she had expected. She had always seen Emma as different, but never in this way. The complexity of it all made her feel like she had been living in a bubble, completely unaware of the larger forces at play. She tried to ignore it, to push it out of her mind, but every time she saw Emma's quiet, downcast eyes, something inside her would stir. Emma had always been the one to quietly endure, never fighting back, always retreating into the background. But now, Lily wondered, was there more to her than she had realized? Was Emma just a pawn in a bigger story that neither of them fully understood? One evening, when the house was eerily quiet, Lily found herself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the letter from Emma's biological mother. She had read it several times now, but this time it felt different. The words seemed to jump off the page, pulling her in deeper. She couldn't escape the feeling that there was something she had missed, something she needed to understand if she was ever going to make things right. With a deep breath, Lily made a decision: she had to talk to Emma. It was time to stop hiding behind anger and resentment and face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. As she approached Emma's room, her heart raced. She wasn't sure what to say, or even how to start. She had spent so much time shutting Emma out, blaming her for things that weren't her fault. Now, the weight of it all seemed unbearable. Lily knocked on the door softly, hesitant. There was no response. She knocked again, a little louder this time, and finally, Emma's voice called from inside. "Come in." Lily opened the door slowly, unsure of what to expect. Emma was sitting on her bed, her legs crossed beneath her, her eyes glued to the pages of a book. For a moment, the sight of her seemed so innocent, so untouched by the turmoil that had been brewing between them. It made Lily feel even worse for what she had said, for the way she had rejected her. Emma looked up, her face expressionless. "What is it?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but guarded. Lily took a deep breath, fighting back the lump that had formed in her throat. She had rehearsed this in her head 100 times, but now that she was here, everything seemed to fall apart. "Emma, I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. I've been awful to you. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault." Emma didn't respond immediately. She just stared at her, her face unreadable. Lily's chest tightened. She didn't know if Emma would ever forgive her, or if this was even enough. Lily continued, her voice faltering. I found out about your mom. About everything. I didn't understand what you'd been through. I didn't understand the kind of pain you've been carrying all these years. And I'm sorry for rejecting you. I know I've hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. There was a long silence, and Lily was afraid that Emma was going to say something to push her away, that she would shut her out completely. But instead, Emma set her book aside and sighed, her eyes softening for the first time in what felt like weeks. It's not your fault, Lily, she said quietly. You didn't know. I didn't want you to know. Lily was taken aback. You didn't want me to know? Why not? Emma paused, as though gathering the strength to speak. Because I didn't want you to see me as someone different. I didn't want you to think of me as the girl with the messed up family. I wanted to be just like you, to be your sister. I wanted to fit in. But every time you looked at me, I saw that look in your eyes, like you were holding something against me, even when you didn't say it out loud. I wasn't just your adopted sister, Lily. I was the girl who came from a past that wasn't just mine to carry. It was everyone's. Lily felt her heart crack at the raw honesty in Emma's voice. She realized then that she had never really seen Emma. She had always seen the label, the adopted sister. But now, hearing her words, she understood that Emma was more than just that. She was a person, with her own story, her own pain. Lily had been too selfish to see it before. I'm so sorry, Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't understand. I was angry for no reason. I thought you were just some outsider, but now I see, you were trying to protect me, and I pushed you away. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she smiled faintly. It's okay. I've always wanted to be your sister, and I always will be, no matter what. Lily felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the tension between them slowly began to dissolve. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to be easy, but at least they were starting to understand each other. They were starting to heal. The conversation shifted as Lily and Emma began to talk more about their shared past, and for the first time, Lily listened without judgment. She asked about Emma's memories of her biological mother, and Emma hesitated before she spoke, revealing pieces of her life that Lily had never known. It wasn't just about the scandal, it was about the pain of feeling abandoned, of being caught in the crossfire of a system that had failed them both. Emma talked about her hope that, one day, she could meet her biological mother again, though she didn't know what that might look like. She shared her fears of rejection, her fear of never truly finding a place in the world. Lily, for the first time, understood the depth of that fear, and it made her realize how much she had taken for granted. The conversation was difficult, raw, and painful, but it was also the beginning of something new. Lily knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to rebuild her relationship with Emma, to learn more about her, and to make things right. As the evening wore on, the two sisters sat together, no longer divided by resentment or misunderstanding. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a new beginning, one where they could both grow together, no longer burdened by the weight of the past. It was the first step toward healing, for both of them. And as Lily looked at Emma, she realized that they were both just trying to find their place in the world, and, maybe, together, they could help each other find it. The weeks that followed were filled with small, yet meaningful changes. Emma and Lily slowly began to rebuild their fragile relationship, but it wasn't easy. It took time for the walls of mistrust and resentment to crumble, and even then, the scars from the past remained. The house felt different now, quieter in some ways, but also more peaceful. There was no longer an underlying tension hanging in the air, and the awkward silences that had once dominated family dinners were replaced by tentative conversations and moments of shared laughter. It was clear that things weren't back to normal yet, but they were moving in the right direction. Lily had started to become more attuned to Emma's needs. She asked more questions, showed more interest in Emma's life, and started listening, really listening, to what her sister had to say. They spent afternoons together, talking about everything from school to their favorite books, and occasionally, the topic of their family's past would come up. Emma still seemed hesitant to dive too deep into those waters, but Lily could sense that she was beginning to let her guard down. It wasn't the closeness that Lily had dreamed of, but it was progress. And for now, that was enough. At home, Sarah and Mark also began to adjust to the new dynamic. Sarah had noticed the change in her daughters, though she could tell that Emma was still carrying a lot of emotional weight from the past. She had become more thoughtful, more present, but she was also withdrawn in moments when the past seemed to resurface. Mark, on the other hand, was determined to keep the peace and tried to focus on the positive changes in the household. Yet, the undercurrent of the family's unresolved issues lingered. They all knew that the storm had passed, but there were still lingering clouds on the horizon. It wasn't until one evening, several weeks after Lily and Emma's breakthrough conversation, that the true depth of the situation became clear. The family had decided to take a trip to the nearby lake for a weekend getaway. It was meant to be a fresh start, a chance for all of them to relax and enjoy some time away from the everyday pressures of life. But the trip turned into a turning point, a moment where everything came to light. As they sat by the campfire one evening, the sky above them painted in hues of orange and pink, Emma suddenly spoke up. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but there was a quiet strength behind her words. "There's something I need to tell you all," she said, looking at each of them in turn. Lily, Sarah, and Mark all fell silent, the crackling fire the only sound in the air. It was clear that Emma was about to share something important, something that had been buried deep within her for years. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Emma continued, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "About my mom, about my past, and about how I've felt all this time. I don't think I've ever really told you how hard it's been for me." She paused, taking a deep breath. "When I was younger, I used to fantasize about finding her, my real mom. I thought that if I could just find her, then everything would make sense. That somehow, it would fix the emptiness inside me. But then, as I got older, I realized something. I wasn't just searching for her. I was searching for a part of me that I didn't even know existed. A part of me that I was too afraid to face." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Lily could feel the tension rising. Mark and Sarah exchanged looks, their concern growing, but neither of them interrupted. Emma's confession had broken through something that had been holding her back for so long. It was the first time that she had truly acknowledged the emotional toll of her adoption, the complex layers of her identity, and the burden of living with a past that wasn't her own. "I'm not angry anymore," Emma continued, her voice cracking slightly. "But for a long time, I didn't know where I fit. I didn't know where I belonged. I couldn't just be the girl who came from a broken family. I didn't want to be that girl, the one who was labeled as different, the one who carried that stain with her." She turned to Lily, her eyes filled with vulnerability. "I thought if I could just make you see me as your sister, maybe then I could finally feel like I wasn't just a part of someone else's mess." Lily felt her throat tighten as she listened to Emma's words. She had been so caught up in her own feelings, in her own struggles, that she hadn't seen the depth of Emma's pain. Emma wasn't just struggling to fit into their family, she was struggling to fit into her own identity. And the rejection that Lily had felt from her had only added to that weight. "I'm sorry," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper, but full of sincerity. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I never understood. I was just angry and confused, and I took it all out on you." Emma smiled softly, a mixture of relief and sadness in her expression. "It's not your fault. You didn't know. But now that we're talking about it, I feel like I can finally breathe. I don't have all the answers, and I'm still figuring out who I am. But I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I don't want to hide from my past, from who I am. I just want to be real with you. And with myself." The words hung in the air like a weight, but they also felt like a release. For the first time, Emma seemed to be truly free from the burden she had carried for so long. Lily reached out, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no distance between them. They were, in that moment, exactly what they had needed to be all along, family. It wasn't about being perfect, about having everything figured out. It was about understanding, about letting go of the past and choosing to move forward together. The next morning, as they packed up their things and prepared to head home, Sarah and Mark exchanged knowing glances. They had seen the change in their daughters, the shift in their relationship, and they both understood that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where healing was possible, where mistakes could be forgiven, and where love could truly conquer all the pain they had once carried. As the family drove back home, the sun shining brightly through the trees, Emma sat quietly beside Lily, their shoulders brushing against each other. The road ahead was uncertain, and there would still be challenges to face. But for the first time, Emma didn't feel alone. She had her sister by her side, and she had found a way to make peace with the past. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. The pain would always be there, a part of who she was, but it no longer defined her. It was just one chapter in her story, and she was finally ready to move forward, embracing whatever came next. As the days passed, the changes in the family dynamic were undeniable. Lily and Emma's relationship had blossomed into something new, something more fragile yet stronger at the same time. Every day presented a new challenge, but there was a sense of growth, a sense that they were finally beginning to understand each other on a deeper level. But even as they navigated this newfound closeness, old wounds from the past were still there, lingering in the shadows, ready to resurface at any moment. At school, Lily began to see the difference in how she viewed Emma. She wasn't just her adopted sister anymore. She was her real sister, with all the complexities that came with that. Lily found herself standing up for Emma more often, defending her when others made assumptions or cast judgment. She no longer saw Emma as someone who was different from her, but as someone who had her own story, her own struggles, and her own strength. In the past, when people questioned their relationship, Lily would just brush it off, but now she felt a deep need to protect her sister, to make sure that no one ever made her feel less than she was. Emma, on the other hand, had become more open, more expressive. She no longer hid behind the quiet walls she had built around herself. She joined conversations, made jokes, and began to truly engage with the world around her. It was as though the weight of the secrets she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. But despite the outward changes, there were still moments when the past crept in, like a shadow that she couldn't shake off. Late at night, Emma would lie awake, her mind racing with thoughts of her biological mother and the life she had been forced to leave behind. There were times when she would sit in silence, staring out of the window, lost in thought, and Lily would find herself wondering what was going through her sister's mind. But even during these moments, Emma wasn't alone. Lily was there for her, offering a comforting presence, even if she didn't have all the answers. It wasn't always easy for either of them, but they had learned that being there for each other, without judgment, was the most important thing. They were no longer just sisters by name, they were sisters by choice, by heart. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the living room, their parents came in, looking more serious than usual. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances before Mark spoke up. "We need to talk to both of you about something important," he said. The tone of his voice immediately put both girls on edge, and they looked at each other with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Sarah sat down beside them, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "There's something we've been meaning to tell you, and it's time you both know," she began, her voice soft but steady. "We've been doing some thinking, and after everything that's happened, we feel it's important that you understand the full truth about Emma's past." Lily and Emma both sat up straighter, a sense of unease spreading between them. It wasn't that they hadn't already talked about Emma's biological mother, but there had always been a sense of unfinished business, a feeling that there were still pieces of the story missing. We've been in touch with your biological mother, Emma, Sarah continued. She wants to meet you. She's been asking about you for years, and now she's in a place where she feels ready to reconnect. We know this is a lot to take in, and we're here to support you, no matter what you decide. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that Emma's biological mother was out there somewhere, but the thought of Emma actually meeting her sent a wave of fear and anxiety through her. What would that mean for their family? Would Emma choose to leave? Would this be the end of the closeness they had worked so hard to build? Emma, for her part, was silent, her eyes downcast. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she said nothing. Lily could see the conflict in her sister's eyes, the hope and the fear, the yearning for answers and the dread of what those answers might bring. It was clear that Emma didn't know what to do, what to feel. On one hand, the possibility of meeting her biological mother seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to reconnect with a part of her past that had always haunted her. But on the other hand, it was terrifying. What if it wasn't the reunion she had imagined? What if the mother she had longed for wasn't the person she had hoped? Lily placed a gentle hand on Emma's arm, offering her support. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you, she said softly. You don't have to do this alone. Emma looked up at her, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Then Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready. But I think I need to know who she is. I need to know why she left me. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances, clearly relieved that Emma had made a decision, but they also knew that this was just the beginning. Reuniting with her biological mother wouldn't be easy, and there were no guarantees that the outcome would be what any of them hoped for. But they all agreed that Emma needed to make the choice for herself, and they would be there to support her no matter what. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with uncertainty. Emma went back and forth, grappling with her emotions, her expectations, and her fear. Lily, for her part, tried to be as supportive as possible, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel anxious about the impact it might have on their family. She had come to rely on her sister in ways she had never expected, and the thought of losing her, even just emotionally, was a daunting one. When the day finally arrived, the family drove to a small, quiet cafe where Emma had agreed to meet her biological mother. The anticipation was palpable, the silence in the car thick with tension. Emma sat in the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Lily reached back and took her sister's hand, offering what little comfort she could. As they arrived at the cafe, Emma's nerves were at an all-time high. She had no idea what to expect, and the uncertainty of it all made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control. Sarah and Mark reassured her, telling her that they would wait inside, but Emma insisted that they stay close by, that they be there for her if things went wrong. When they finally entered the cafe, the atmosphere was strangely calm. Emma's biological mother was sitting at a table by the window, her face older but still familiar in ways that Emma couldn't quite explain. There was a brief moment where time seemed to slow down, and Emma just stood there, frozen in place. Her heart was pounding, and her stomach twisted with nerves. This was it. The moment she had spent years waiting for, and yet, she wasn't sure she was ready. But then she took a deep breath and walked forward, her step steady and deliberate. The meeting that followed was filled with emotion, confusion, and a deep sense of longing. Emma's biological mother apologized for the years of silence, explaining that she had been in a difficult place in her life, unable to care for Emma. But she also spoke of the love she had always carried for her daughter, even from afar. It wasn't a perfect reunion. It wasn't the fairy tale Emma had dreamed of. But it was real, and it was a step toward healing. Emma realized that while she might never get all the answers, she had found something far more valuable, the strength to move forward, to let go of the past, and to embrace her future, whatever it held. As the meeting ended and Emma walked back to her family, she felt a sense of peace. The weight she had carried for so long was still there, but it no longer had the power to control her. She wasn't defined by her past. She was defined by the choices she made, by the relationships she nurtured, and by the love she had found within her own heart. And as she sat with Lily and their parents, Emma knew that she had made the right choice, for herself, for her family, and for the future that awaited her. Months passed after the meeting with Emma's biological mother, and the family had begun to adjust to the new rhythm of their lives. There had been no grand revelation, no instant closure to the questions that Emma had carried for so long. But the emotional release that came from meeting her birth mother allowed Emma to start embracing her future with a sense of possibility rather than a sense of unfinished business. The pain from her past no longer consumed her every waking moment. Instead, she found herself slowly learning to live with the complexities of her story, acknowledging the good, the bad, and everything in between. Back at home, the bond between Emma and Lily deepened further. It was no longer just about sisterhood out of necessity or obligation, it was a sisterhood built on mutual understanding and respect. Emma began to open up more, not just about her feelings toward their family, but also about her dreams, her ambitions, and the things that excited her. Lily listened more than ever before, offering support without judgment, and in return, Emma started to trust more in her family. She realized that she didn't have to be perfect, that it was okay to have flaws and imperfections, and that Lily and their parents loved her regardless. However, Emma still wrestled with one thing. Even though she had met her birth mother and received some answers, the longing for her biological family lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't about wanting to replace her adopted family, but there was a part of her that wanted to know more about her roots, where she came from and what her life might have been like if circumstances had been different. It wasn't easy to balance the love she had for Sarah and Mark with this curiosity about her biological family. But it was a truth she had to face. Every family has its secrets, its layers, and its complicated history, and Emma's was no exception. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Emma found herself once again at the crossroads of her emotions. Sarah and Mark, who had been so patient and understanding throughout this entire journey, had noticed Emma's quiet moments, the moments where she seemed to be lost in thought. They knew that something was still troubling her, though Emma hadn't spoken much about it since the meeting. Mark cleared his throat, setting down his fork, and turned to Emma. "How are you really feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle but direct. "You've come so far, but we can tell there's still something on your mind." Emma looked at her father, then at her mother, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to hide her feelings. "I've been thinking a lot," Emma began, her voice quiet but steady. "About my birth mother, about my real family, and about who I really am. I know I can't change the past, and I don't want to. But I also don't want to pretend like I have all the answers. I still don't know who I am completely. Sometimes I feel like there's this piece of me that's missing, and I don't know how to fill it." Lily, who had been sitting beside her, reached over and placed a hand on her sister's. "You're not alone in this," she said. "I might not understand exactly how you feel, but I'm here for you. We all are." Sarah and Mark nodded in agreement, their eyes full of support. It was clear that no matter what Emma chose, they would stand by her. Emma smiled faintly at her family, grateful for their unwavering love and support. The next few weeks were filled with introspection for Emma. She spent time journaling, reflecting on her life, her past, and what she wanted her future to look like. As much as she had embraced her new identity within her adopted family, she couldn't ignore the voice in her heart urging her to explore the possibility of a deeper connection with her biological roots. She wasn't sure if she would ever find the answers she sought, but she knew that she needed to try. It was part of her healing process. One Saturday afternoon, Emma received a letter in the mail. It was from her birth mother. The letter was full of raw emotion, written with a mix of regret, hope, and sorrow. Her biological mother explained that she had never meant to leave Emma, but her life circumstances at the time had been too overwhelming for her to be the mother Emma deserved. She expressed her deep desire to reconnect and learn about the woman Emma had become, but she also understood if Emma wasn't ready to take that step. Reading the letter, Emma felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, and a deep longing. She had spent so many years wondering what her birth mother was like, imagining the life she could have had, and now, here she was, holding this letter in her hands. It was an invitation to explore something she had always kept at arm's length, and it brought back memories of the pain she had felt for so long. After sitting with the letter for hours, Emma knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to jump into a relationship with her biological mother just because the letter arrived. But the invitation, the acknowledgement of her pain and desire for connection, was something Emma couldn't ignore. She decided to write a letter back, not to immediately reconnect, but to acknowledge her birth mother's words and express her own feelings. It wasn't a decision to sever ties with her adoptive family, it was a decision to reclaim a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. In her letter, Emma explained how much she appreciated her birth mother's honesty, but also expressed that she was not ready to move forward just yet. She was still processing everything, still figuring out who she was. She thanked her birth mother for opening the door but made it clear that it was going to take time for her to decide whether or not to step through it. The process of writing the letter was cathartic. Emma felt a sense of empowerment, as though she was finally taking control of her own narrative. For so long, she had let her past dictate who she was, but now she was rewriting that story, piece by piece, on her own terms. As Emma sealed the envelope and sent it off, she felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the conclusion to her journey, far from it, but it was a significant step forward. She wasn't defined by her biological family, nor was she defined solely by her adopted family. She was Emma, a young woman with a complex past, but with a bright future ahead of her. The next few months passed in a blur of small moments, family trips, late-night talks, and quiet days spent reflecting on life. Emma began to realize that family wasn't just about blood. It wasn't just about the people who were bound to you by circumstance. It was about the people who loved you, who stood by you no matter what, who fought for you when things got tough. And her family, Sarah, Mark, and Lily, had done that for her. They had given her the love and support she needed to heal, to grow, and to become the person she was meant to be. And as she sat around the dinner table one evening, her family around her, Emma realized that she had already found what she had been searching for all along. It wasn't answers about her past, or a relationship with a biological mother who could never replace the love she had from the family that raised her. What she had been searching for was a sense of belonging, and in that moment, she had it, fully and completely. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was enough. The next chapter of Emma's life wasn't going to be easy, but she knew she could face it with the love and strength of the family who had been there all along. And as she looked around at her parents and her sister, she realized that no matter what happened, they would always be there for each other, through every challenge, every triumph, and every twist in their shared journey. Together, they were stronger than ever.